Committee will come to order. Good afternoon and welcome to today's hearing entitled Public Access to Federally Funded Research. Without objection, the chair and ranking minority member will have 5 minutes to make opening statements, followed by opening statements not to exceed 3 minutes by any other member who seeks recognition. And without objection, members and witnesses may have 5 legislative days to submit a written statement or extraneous materials for the record. The purpose of today's hearing is to examine the current state of public access to federally funded research and to discuss the potential implications of increased access. Every year, the federal government, using taxpayer dollars, funds tens of billions of dollars in basic and applied research. Most of the funding is concentrated within 11 federal departments and/or agencies. So while this is not a legislative hearing attached to any particular bill, there has been much interest, deservedly so, surrounding this topic on both sides of the issue. How much access should the public have to federally funded research? How would increased access affect grantees, researchers, and scholars? To that end, I determined that the subcommittee should allow an atmosphere for dialogue and discussion of public access to federally funded research. It is relevant, current, and within the purview of this subcommittee. So today we will hear testimony from stakeholders in the areas of publishing, science research, education, and patient advocacy. This hearing will also examine the operational processes utilized by the National Institutes of Health in its open access program, including but not limited to the submission process, data usage, embargo time period, and compliance information. We will examine how the National Institutes of Health has been affected by the congressional mandate to ensure that the public has access to the published results of NIH-funded research no later than 12 months after publication. What have been the results and ramifications, positive and negative, of that policy to the stakeholders? I thank all of our witnesses for appearing today and look forward to their testimonies. I now recognize the distinguished ranking minority member, Mr. Chaffetz of Utah. Mr. Chaffetz.
Thank you, and thanks to the various witnesses that are here today. I appreciate your flexibility and understanding with all the votes and other hearings and things that are going on here prior to the recess. I appreciate your patience, and I appreciate holding this hearing. Looking forward to hearing the exchange from our witnesses. The extraordinary expansion of access to digital information over the past decade has caused heated debate to arise over the issue of public access to federally funded research results. The federal government funds billions of dollars in research every year, much of it in the form of grants to researchers. Typically, researchers write 1 or more manuscripts detailing the findings of the research in hopes of having them published as articles in scientific journals. Journal publishers subject these submitted manuscripts to vigorous peer-reviewed process to ensure that the scientific results and conclusions are valid prior to selection for publication. In exchange for the costs associated with peer review, editing, the publication of the manuscript, the researcher typically assigns his or her copyright to the journal publisher. Historically, Congress has directed that federally funded researchers retain expansive intellectual property rights to encourage the advancement and distribution of scientific knowledge as widely as possible. This system has proven highly successful in allowing researchers from universities in the United States and across the world access to new and constantly evolving scientific information from which they can pursue new discoveries and innovations. There are now more than 25,000 peer-reviewed journals worldwide, produced by more than 2,000 publishers, ranging from the well-known, such as Nature or the New England Journal of Medicine, to one of my own personal favorites, and I know something that all good Americans subscribe to, the Journal on Matrix Analysis and Applications, which publishes articles of interest to the numerical linear algebra community. You subscribe, don't you, Mr. Chairman? Yes, I'll share my copy with you. In the United States, the scholarly publishing enterprise provides direct employment for roughly 30,000 people. I am sympathetic to the arguments that proponents of the increased public and free access to federally funded research make regarding the rights of taxpayers to the results of that research. They paid for it, and they should be able to access the fruits of that research. However, journal publishers invest a significant amount of money and provide a valuable service to the scientific community and the nation in peer-reviewed editing, publication, and dissemination of researched articles. According to the estimates made by the publishing community, the National Institutes of Health funded research results in approximately 85,000 journal-published articles annually. By the time a final peer-reviewed manuscript is completed, the point at which NIH requires submission under their current rules, publishers estimate that they have invested in excess of $1,400 per article, or roughly $126 million annually. Concerned about the federal government mandating free access policies, such as the current one at NIH, that diminish copyright protections for private sector journal articles. Also, particularly with regard to some of the smaller nonprofit professional organizations that publish only 1 or 2 journals. I'm concerned about their ability to stay in the publishing game and their willingness to invest in the vigorous peer review process that currently makes our scientific enterprise so vibrant without strong copyright incentives. One thing I hope we all keep in mind, there are many alternatives to the type of policy currently employed at the National Institutes of Health, and which H.R. 5037, which has been referred to the subcommittee, would expand to other federal research funding agencies. These alternative policies would strike an appropriate balance between the taxpayer access to the results of federally funded research and the copyright incentives and protections of the publishers. For example, in the 2007 America Competes Act, Congress directed the National Science Foundation to develop a system whereby research reports, including a readily accessible summary of the outcomes of the NSF-sponsored research, are disseminated instead of copyrighted materials for the publishers. Again, it is a complex issue. There are a variety of directions in which we can go, and thus I think the hearing is very appropriate. Look forward to hearing from all of the witnesses today. Appreciate your preparation, and I assure you, given the schedule and whatnot, all of the information will be properly reviewed. Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chaffetz. If there are no more opening statements, I will now introduce our first panel. And on this panel, we will hear from Mr. Alan Adler. Mr. Adler is the Vice President of Legal and Government Affairs with the Association of American Publishers. Welcome. Our next witness will be Dr. Stephen Breckler. Dr. Breckler is a graduate of the University of California at San Diego and received his master's and PhD from Ohio State University. He is the author of numerous publications and articles in the area of psychology. He has served as an assistant professor at Johns Hopkins and as a program director at the National Science Foundation. He is currently the executive director at the American Psychology Association. Thank you for being here. And our third witness will be Professor Ralph Oman. Mr. Oman teaches copyright law at the George Washington University Law School. He also serves as a fellow on the faculty of the law school's Creative and Innovative Economy Center. Mr. Oman served as Chief Counsel for the U.S. Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Patents, Copyrights, and Trademarks. He is a graduate of Hamilton College and Georgetown University Law Center. I want to welcome all of you for being here today. It is the policy of the subcommittee to swear in all witnesses before they testify. Would you all please stand and raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may be seated, and let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Each witness will have 5 minutes to make opening statements, and your complete written testimony will be included in the hearing record. The lighting system in front of you will indicate how much time you have left. And when it turns red, we would like for you to cease and desist. Mr. Adler, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this hearing on behalf of the Association of American Publishers, the principal trade association of the U.S. book publishing industry, whose for-profit and non-profit members publish books, journals, and other literary works in every field of human interest, both in print and digital formats. Relevant to today's hearing, AAP's membership includes some 50 for-profit companies and nonprofit organizations that publish scientific, technical, and medical journals in both print and digital formats. Because I've submitted a written statement for the record, let me just briefly identify a few key points. First, as we discuss federally funded research, you'll hear references to peer-reviewed journal articles and scholarly publications, as well as characterizations of those items as the results or products of federally funded research. Such characterizations, however, are not accurate, and they are particularly misleading in the context of today's discussion. And it's critical that you keep in mind the distinction between federally funded research and the private sector journal articles that are written by the funded researchers to report and document that research. The peer-reviewed articles published in scholarly journals are not themselves funded research, nor are they deliverables required under the terms of the funding grant, as are, for example, the annual progress reports that the research grantee is typically required to submit to the funding agency. Instead, they are separate reports on the funded research written with the express intention of publication in relevant peer-reviewed journals to describe and explain the process, findings, and significance of the funded research that has been conducted by the authoring researcher. These are prepared for publication and ultimately published by peer-reviewed journals without funding from the government. Second, the articles that are published in peer-reviewed journals are ultimately collaborative products of the researcher and the journal publisher, which devotes a substantial amount of its editorial and other publishing resources to ensuring that the final published version of the researcher's account is accurate and that its significance is understood within the context of other research in the same field or related fields. Journal publishers invest hundreds of millions of dollars in peer review, editing, and publishing processes, including for sophisticated communications technologies and electronic resources, support personnel, and many part and full-time editors. Publishers manage all stages of the peer review process from the time a journal publisher receives a new manuscript until the final version is accepted for publication as a journal article. Each manuscript undergoes rigorous review by editors and technical experts prior to publication in a resource-intensive process that helps ensure the quality and integrity of these published accounts of scientific research. Government mandates like the NIH Public Access Policy, which requires free online access to the author's final peer-reviewed manuscript after acceptance for journal publication, expropriate, or in simpler terms, take without consideration the substantial investments that the publisher makes in providing added value to the researcher's original manuscript. And by doing so, they substantially weaken an area of our economy where the United States has a distinct comparative advantage over its competitors in global markets. Science and technology publishers based in North America account for some 45% of all peer-reviewed scientific research papers published annually worldwide. For many U.S. journal publishers, over 50% of their revenues come from subscriptions delivered outside U.S. borders. But through mandates like the NIH policy, the government intervenes to become the de facto publisher of the articles and compete directly with the journal publisher in making them available for public access and distribution. Even worse, this unwarranted competition from the government can lead to further harm to the publishers by facilitating digital piracy, as we've discovered with respect to evidence showing that companies in China are reselling and distributing these journal articles as downloaded from NIH's PubMed Central database without authorization from the publisher. While some may think such piracy is not the government's fault, the simple reality is that in today's digitally networked world, the government cannot presume to make these copyrighted works freely available online to the U.S. taxpayer without also giving them away free to the rest of the world, including competing national governments, public and private institutions, corporations, and yes, pirates, all of whom, with the exception of the pirates, would otherwise probably acquire these works from the journal publisher by subscription. If someone can get these articles for free on a government website, why would they pay to subscribe to journals? Surveys have shown that a significant number of librarians would be likely to cancel their institutional subscriptions to journals if the articles contained in them were accessible online for free, even if the articles were not available for a year and even if not all of the articles in the journal were available online. Thus, mandates like the NIH policy also undermine copyright protection for for journal articles and diminish incentives for publishers to continue making substantial investments in managing the peer review process and otherwise improving scientific communications and providing and maintaining non-government filtered public records of federally funded research. Mr. Chairman, there are better approaches to enhancing public access to the results of federally funded research.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Dr. Breckler, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, I'm Dr. Steve Breckler, Executive Director for Science of the American Psychological Association. APA is the largest scientific and professional organization of psychologists in the United States. We're the world's largest association of psychologists with over 150,000 researchers, educators, clinicians, consultants, and students as members. APA is also the largest publisher of behavioral science research, with 56 of the premier scholarly journals in the field of psychology. The mission of APA is to advance the creation, communication, and application of psychological knowledge to benefit society and to improve people's lives. APA strongly supports the goal of public access to federally funded research. What is not clear, however, is the best way to accomplish the goal. The methods implemented to date, and the ones currently under most active consideration, do not necessarily represent the best possible methods. In fact, some carry substantial risk of harming scientific scholarship and actually impeding our ability to accomplish the ultimate goal of enhancing public access to federally funded research. As a citizen and as a scientist, I take enormous pride in American science. I think we all do. We are the stewards of the world's strongest and most vibrant system of scientific research and scholarship. The last thing that any of us wants to do is to harm or otherwise weaken American science. Our nation's most serious investments in science began over 60 years ago. It was recognized then that the federal government was in the best position to provide the financial resources to support science and research in this country. And it was also recognized then that the private sector and the nonprofit scholarly societies were in the best position to manage the publication and dissemination of research results in this country. The federal government did not want to get into the scholarly publishing business, nor did society demand it. Indeed, it has always been the opposite of maintaining a separation between the government and the final production of scholarship, of protecting academic freedom and allowing scholars in this country to do their work without government interference. The success of American science can be traced to this formula, to this division of responsibility and management of the scientific enterprise. It has served us extremely well. And now, for a variety of reasons that really have nothing to do with scientific achievement and advancement, some among us want to change the formula. Change can be a good thing, but it should be well-reasoned and thoroughly researched before wholesale implementation. A mistake could mean irreparable damage, an outcome that none of us wants. I have provided detail in our written testimony about some of the potential risk of poorly developed public access policies. Scholarly publishers add tremendous value to the communication and dissemination of science, and we invest enormous resources in the process. Yet the current public misunderstanding is that those costs are either inconsequential or that the government already bears those costs. Neither is true. Alternative models for public access exist. NSF, for example, requires its investigators to submit their final project reports and citations to published research documents resulting from their research for posting on the NSF public website. This is consistent with the fact that taxpayers are paying for the research results, not for the publications. APA suggests that the current situation offers the opportunity to conduct a natural experiment, to evaluate the various public access models currently in place. This opportunity was recognized by OSTP when it noted in late 2009 that the NIH model has a variety of features that can be evaluated, and there are other ways to offer the public enhanced access to peer-reviewed scholarly publications. Indeed, it is implementation of a public access policy. NIH assumes that 12 months provides a sufficient embargo period to allow publishers enough time to recoup their investment. Yet, as the data we provided in our written testimony demonstrate, 12 months is clearly too short a time for many publishers, especially those in the social and behavioral sciences, to recover even a fraction of their investments. In APA's experience, less than 16% of the ultimate usage of a journal article occurs within the first 12 months of publication. We can do better. We need to bring all stakeholders to the table to develop a viable system of public access, one that makes federally funded research accessible to the public, but without sacrificing or harming the very scientific infrastructure supported by the federal government and desired by the public. This was the recommendation of the OSTP Scholarly Publishing Roundtable, and it is the basis for a provision of the Competes Bill currently working its way through Congress to establish an interagency working group on public access. APA supports these recommendations, but we emphasize the need to include the perspective of scientific societies that publish social and behavioral science research. When it comes to policies surrounding public access to federally funded research, we must be thoughtful and careful and willing to take the time and make the effort to do it right. Otherwise, we run the real risk of reducing rather than increasing public access to federally funded research and of causing long-term harm to America's science and technology infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Breckler, for your testimony. Professor Oman, you may proceed.
It's a great honor to be here today. Mr. Chairman, I'm not necessarily a stakeholder here. I am appearing as the former Register of Copyrights of the United States, and I, as always, represent the public interest. I don't represent any of the parties, but like an old fire horse, I hear the bells ring, and I'm often running to protect the U.S. copyright system. I'm concerned that the new public access proposals that we have before us will in fact weaken the commercial market for scientific, technical, and medical journals. If the publishers of these journals eventually get out of business because they can't make it pay, we will lose a very valuable tool for scientific advance. If sales plummet, how could the publishers continue to publish? I suppose that is the issue that we have to answer today, whether or not that dire prediction will in fact come true. I urge Congress to develop a public access policy that respects the spirit of the copyright law. The Patent and Copyright Clause of the Constitution urges Congress, quote, to promote the progress of science and the useful arts, unquote, summarizing the rest of the provision, by giving authors and publishers an exclusive right in their writings. With that powerful incentive, direct from the Constitution, to commercialize their journals, the publishers will reach as broad an audience as possible for these important publications. The tension between authors and inventors who benefit from government research grants on the one hand, and the advocates of government ownership of the fruits of that research on the other, has been with us for a long time. I worked on the Bayh-Dole legislation back in 1980 for my old boss, Senator Mathias of Maryland. In that debate over patent policy in 1980, Senator Russell Long of Louisiana argued that any patents developed with government research funds should be owned by the government. In his inimitable style, he thundered, "We paid for it, we own it." Senator Bayh and Senator Dole reasoned that the taxpayers would get a far greater return on investment if we instead facilitated private sector ownership and commercialization of these patents, putting the inventions to work for the American people, creating jobs, and helping American competitiveness. They won that argument, and the Small Business and University Patent Procedure Act has given American innovation a big boost around the world. The same policy arguments apply here, Mr. Chairman. For all the reasons mentioned by Mr. Adler and Dr. Breckler, I do not think that the government should get deeply involved in scholarly publishing. It is a bad fit for a free enterprise economy with our tradition of free speech. With normal copyright protection, the private sector publishers will run the peer review process. They will select the articles. They will aggressively market those publications to corporations, to libraries, to research institutions. That's the American way. A broad, free public access policy is an unfortunate precedent for a country like the United States, whose great strength in foreign markets is intellectual property. I spent more than 8 years of my life as Register of Copyrights, fighting to protect American authors and publishers from foreign pirates. And I find it a little strange today that Congress may now decide to give away some of that intellectual property free of charge. The pirates must feel vindicated. There's a huge foreign commercial market for these publications, and a free access policy would cost the United States millions of dollars that we now get from rich foreign governments and large foreign corporations. As Senator Mathias, my old boss, once said, talk about Uncle Sap. It's like standing on the coastline and shoveling buckets of greenbacks into the ocean. We are the only country, as far as I know, to have such a give-it-away-for-nothing policy. I hope Congress will give the evolving digital marketplace a chance to come to grips with the new online technologies without undercutting the incentives that publishers have relied on for 200 years. We all have compassion for the parent of a sick child with a rare disease, wanting to have quick and easy access to articles explaining the latest state-of-the-art therapies. Let's solve that problem of patient access without doing damage to the incentives provided by copyright. Let's all sit down and reason together and figure out how to get the job done. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Professor Omar. And we will now move to the question period for members and proceed under the 5-minute rule. We will begin with Mr. Chaffetz for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. One of the things we're looking at is H.R. 5037, and one of the things that would happen under that piece of legislation is that it would shorten the time, the embargo time, from 12 months to 6 months. Can you give me a sense of the impact that you would see by moving from 12 months to 6 months? And I'll give you a brief time, but I've only got 5 minutes, so I got to go swiftly. We'll start maybe with Mr. Adler.
Well, Congressman, the fact of the matter is, as we've argued all along, there is no one-size-fits-all embargo period that will make sense in journal publishing across the diverse economic models that exist for publishers. What might work with respect to a large commercial publisher doesn't necessarily work with a not-for-profit society publisher or a patient advocacy organization which publishes a journal not so much in the same way that a large commercial publisher would, looking for profits, but simply to help generate additional funds to support some of its other patient advocacy activities. So the situation here is that if you have a journal that publishes on a schedule that's quarterly, annually, as opposed to one that publishes once every month, the idea that an embargo of 6 months is going to work adequately for all of them simply makes no economic sense.
That's correct. And in the case of social and behavioral science, where the shelf life of new articles is actually quite long, much longer than in other fields of science, we've suggested on the basis of our data that 12 months is too short. 6 months would probably be devastating. It would hurt the circulation of the journal articles, and it would also create a perverse sort of unfair advantage for federally funded research. We pride ourselves at APA Journals in publishing a substantial number of articles that are not funded by the federal government. It's a wonderful thing. It encourages scholarship and it increases productivity. But if you put journal articles out there for free in 6 months, it creates a disincentive for people to purchase the journals, and it drives down the ability for non-funded investigators to get their work published and to be seen.
Professor Oman?
The incentives to publication are weakened considerably by the 12-month publication requirement. 6 months would effectively destroy the market for those journals, in my opinion.
You know, one of the more compelling arguments for increased public access are these patient groups, and you touched on it at the end of your testimony, Professor. How do you address that? What's the answer to that? How do you go back to these patient groups to say, look, we want to get this information as swiftly as possible. I don't care what your financial model is. We got to save lives here. Maybe Dr. Breckler, we can start with you, and then Mr. Adler.
That's absolutely correct, and we have maintained all along that we would like to sit down with all of the stakeholders and work out a viable system for everybody, rather than having the federal government mandate one particular model that happens to be in favor of one particular.
And I guess that's the issue. I mean, if there's something we could get everybody to agree on, I'd love to see that. But is there any Is there progress towards that? Is there any suggestion of that? Is there anything that's come close to that?
Absolutely. The publishers have always been at the leading edge of innovation in these kinds of things, and are working with all kinds of groups to make available the relevant articles, to put them in depositories, to identify the ones ahead of time that are of greatest relevance, to do all kinds of things to increase the accessibility and availability of them.
Mr. Adler?
That's correct, Congressman, that publishers have been working with patient advocacy organizations in the past few years, for example, to create something called Patient Inform, which is an online service that provides patients and their caregivers access to some of the most up-to-date, reliable research about the diagnosis and treatment of specific diseases, and does so at no cost to them. Patient Inform also helps to interpret the research and provides access to additional, more easily comprehended materials that help explain diagnosis and treatment. At the same time, many publishers individually have their own programs for providing access to patient, including walk-in clauses, as they're called, in their licenses that enable libraries that subscribe to their journals to give any member of the public free electronic on-site access to those journal articles.
Okay. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And go back.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Chu, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Oman, in your testimony, you wondered if the government will commandeer the rights of creators of pre-existing materials that submitted articles may contain. I have 3 questions about that. First, how often do articles contain materials that the researcher does not already own? And secondly, do publishers always clear these rights for the author? And thirdly, why would publishers not continue to provide this service under an open access policy?
I think they would continue to provide those services if they were still in business and could make a go of it commercially. The danger is, of course, that they won't remain in business and they won't be available to provide those valuable services in polishing and shaping and preparing the article for public dissemination. I probably should defer to the publishers on that point, but it's my view that that the system that we have now, in terms of giving copyrights to the authors, to the publishers, is the best way of encouraging the dissemination of this material and having those valuable services added on to the raw manuscript that is produced by the government-funded researcher.
If I can respond also, yes. I'm not in the publishing end of APA, but I do know enough about how things work. That's an example of the kind of value added to scientific publications, to check those things and to give credit where credit is due. It takes time, it takes staff, it takes work to do that, it takes money to do that and to do it well. And it's just another example of the many, many things that consume resources to bring to the market high-quality scientific publications. That's the kind of thing APA wouldn't publish articles without checking those kinds of things and taking care of those kinds of things ever. But we have to take into account the economic reality of what it costs to do that.
Dr. Breckler, in fact, I wanted to ask about APA. You know, as a psychologist myself and former member of the American Psychological Association, I understand that our field is different from other scientific research disciplines. Can you explain how the NIH public access model uniquely affects psychology compared to other disciplines? I know you've, in your testimony, you talk about 15% of lifetime use occurs in the first year. I wonder if that is unique to our discipline or whether it's similar to other ones.
Sure, a couple of comments. We don't have ready access to the data from other disciplines, so we can't really speak for them. But we've thought a lot about what those data mean and why it is that the uptake is spread over such a long period of time. And I think it has something to do with the nature of the publications and how focused those publications are. Are they little incremental advances in very technical areas, which is common in some fields of science, or are they big, sweeping things that take years to develop and have years of impact and so on? The social and behavioral sciences probably fall into that latter category most of the time. They're not small, incremental, technical answers to small technical questions. They tend to be much broader in scope, which would also be true in other areas of social and behavioral science. And so the risk in the context of NIH, of course, is that NIH funds areas of science across the board. They fund physics and chemistry and microbiology, and in addition to psychology and sociology and other anthropology and other fields. And so to put them all in the same basket and to assume that they all have the same models and the same processes and the same outcomes and so on is a terrible mistake.
Mr. Adler, I can definitely understand the concerns of publishers about the significant investments that you've made in reviewing, accepting, and publishing scientific journal articles. The numbers are not trivial. However, what I also know is that without the American taxpayer who've funded the research, you wouldn't be able to publish such articles. Which is more important, the publisher's investment or the taxpayers who've paid more than $60 billion annually in just biomedical research alone?
I don't believe there's an either-or choice there. The fact of the matter is that, to say that publishers have an advantage because they're able to publish materials that are about something that the government has funded, well, in our country, we hope that publishers always, whether they're newspaper publishers, magazine publishers, book or journal publishers, will be able to publish about the activities of the U.S. government and not feel that they owe a bill to the U.S. government for the right to do so. In this case, we're trying to distinguish very clearly between the federal research, the research activity, which the government does fund, and then the subsequent account of that research by the researcher, describing and explaining the research activity, which the government doesn't generally fund. The publisher funds that. So we think that there is a natural relationship here. It's one that has existed for years. Frankly, it wasn't until the advent of digital network technology allowed for the ability of this type of material to be so easily accessible and to be distributed so quickly around the world that anyone even second-guessed whether or not there was a problem in that relationship.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I see my time's up, and I yield back.
Thank you, and thank the gentlewoman from California. The gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney, is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman for having this hearing. I think it's an important one, and I think it raises a great deal of important problems and challenges for the 21st century. Certainly patients dealing with an illness or their families certainly want to know as much as they possibly can about the illness and to have all the valuable research so that they can know what's happening. And at the same time, the federal government, the taxpayers, have invested in this research, and it's intellectual property that belongs to the United States, and the copyrights belong to the United States, and the publishers have invested in it. And so it's an American product that if you open it up to everyone, meaning patients, but also, I would say, Vietnam, China, the entire world that would like to take this information and immediately use it for their own purposes. And I feel that one of the challenges that we have as a government for our people and for our taxpayers and for our future is how we hold on to our intellectual property. That is the one thing that we continue to produce that is incredibly valuable. But if everything we produce is immediately made available to the entire world so that American workers, American companies cannot take advantage of it, then we are going to be economically disadvantaged to a greater way. And I think that what I'd like to ask all of the panelists, and I begin with Mr. Adler and then go down to Mr. Beckler and Professor Oman, is I think that we need to take another step, not only to protect the intellectual property. You're talking about publishers, but it goes broader than publishers. It's intellectual property. We should have a way that we can let American citizens read about information on the latest research on diseases in a way that they can understand it. As one whose father died of Parkinson's, I was reading everything I could find on Parkinson's. There's a great deal of research done on Parkinson's. And reading these scientific documents, for someone who's not a scientist and not a doctor, it's very difficult. So I think you have a two-pronged approach. Number one, to put the information in a form that the American public can understand and that is usable. But at the same time, if we don't protect our intellectual property, then I fear for the future of our country, quite frankly. And another item, we're talking about taxpayer-researched projects, but we also have a great deal of investment from the private sector that goes into the latest research that patients should have access to. But also, I represent a research industry. I represent major drug companies, major hospitals that do research. And they basically told me if we can't control our intellectual property, they're not going to continue investing in this. So I think that, and we cannot afford, as a country that now has a huge deficit and a huge debt, we can't afford to keep spending, yet the strength of our country is research. We need to continue investing in research, but we've got to hold that research. Otherwise, it is really detrimental to us. We pay for everything, and then within 24 hours, other countries feel like, well, why should I ever do any research? I can just steal it from America. And I think that we need to take another step, legislatively or in some way, with the executive orders, to protect this intellectual property. Otherwise, the private sector is not going to do it. Publishers aren't going to publish it if they can't get some profit out of it. We are a profit company. Unless we want to have a government doing everything, which we can't afford to do, we face a new innovative approach, a problem that we need a new solution to, where we can allow patients and their families to learn about things, but we have to protect our intellectual property. And if we don't, then the private investment is not going to be there, whether it's a research facility or a publisher or whatever. So we need to have incentives for the private sector to be involved, and we also have the challenge of how do we get this out to the public that are Americans, not to pirates who then are going to sell it or produce it. And I think that's a huge challenge for the future of research in this country. And if you look at it, what has made this country great, I would say it's our research and it's our intellectual property. But if we can't hold on to our intellectual property, then I fear for the economic future, quite frankly, of the American workers. So I think there's a huge challenge here, and I'd like to start with Mr. Adler and go down the line and see if you have any answers to it. How can we make information available that is and user-friendly to patients and their families, but at the same time protect the intellectual property so that pirates don't use it and that the incentive is there for private investment, private research, private publishing? If publishers can't get something out of it, they're no longer going to publish it. Then the government has to publish it. So, and quite frankly, what we're being told is ways to save money. So I just throw that out to our panelists and see if you've got any creative ideas of how to approach this.
Well, Congresswoman, on this particular issue, there is a piece of legislation that has been introduced and is pending in the House Judiciary Committee by Chairman John Conyers, as you may know, called the Fair Copyright in Research Works Act. What that legislation would simply...
What number is that? Do you have it? The number of that bill? I can look it up. I can look it up. Never mind.
801. I'm
All
not
right.
sure what the number
What
is
does the bill do?
What the bill basically would say is that if you were dealing with research funding for a particular project where part of the funding comes from someone other than the federal government, and you're talking about extrinsic products, things that are derived from that research, or as you characterize it, are about that research, that also have substantial added value coming from people other than someone who has contracted with the government and been funded by the government as part of the research grant, then the government would not be permitted to take the type of position that has been taken by the NIH under its policy of saying that the government agency, because it funded the research, now has the right to distribute these articles that simply describe and explain the research which were not funded by the government agency, but can be distributed by the government agency in competition with the publisher based solely on the fact that the government funded the research activity. And we think that that piece of legislation would not interfere with research funding activities by the government. It would only make the government make decisions about when it is appropriate for the government to decide that the research that is funding is intended to derive specific products and results that only the government will be able to control, as opposed to allowing the kind of information which comes out of this research, most of which, after all, is factual and is not even subject to copyright protection, to be utilized by anyone that wants to be able to either make a living by publishing reports and accounts of this research, or by explaining the research, whether as a reporter on a science beat for a newspaper or any other basis of disseminating this information. We also think that we've been talking with the U.S. Trade Representative and the Commerce Department about the fact that as they go around the world and engage in bilateral negotiations with many of our trading partners and try to make sure that U.S. intellectual property is protected under those agreements, that they take a look at what the government is doing in this instance and see whether, in fact, this goes completely against the general tenor of what this administration has been trying to accomplish through such efforts.
Thank you. Mr. Beckler?
Thank you. The concept of intellectual property is an interesting thing in the scientific and research community, and generally I think it's safe to say that scientists and researchers want their work to be read. They want it to be seen as broadly as possible. The more the merrier. And so they don't want impediments to the ability for their work to get out there around the world, and I think that's generally true globally. But what scientists and researchers do want is mainly three things, I think. One is that they want to retain credit for their intellectual work. They want to be given credit and be cited for their work, and they don't want it republished under somebody else's name and so on. So they want that kind of thing. The second is that they want to control the fate of their work, the fate of their publications. And the third, and this is the most important thing for the purpose of this discussion, is that they rely on a signaling mechanism that helps to sort out the really good work from the less good work. I won't call it poor work. They need a signaling mechanism that says this is a good article, this is a quality piece of intellectual property, we should pay attention to it. And it's precisely that signaling mechanism that the publishing industry provides through peer review and rigorous selection of articles for publication. We know that in our high quality prestige journals, which are the ones that we're talking about here, if you have an article there, it means something important. How many of us have children now or grandchildren, and we spend a lot of time trying to teach them how to sort through what means something and what doesn't mean something on the internet? It's hard to tell. There are a few signaling mechanisms because it all looks legitimate. What the scholarly publishers bring to the table is legitimacy to the process, and anything that destroys that legitimacy is a loss for science.
Yes, Professor? Any comments, Professor?
Microphone, please.
After your stirring endorsement of the virtues and values of intellectual property, I have nothing to add. Thank you.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. Let me go to Mr. Adler. To recoup cost, have the publishers considered offering access to titles and charge a nominal fee for downloading the full article, much like music and movie websites?
Certainly, that's within the purview of every publisher, whether it's a for-profit or a not-for-profit, to consider in terms of its own business model. And that's exactly the way the system should work. What we're talking about here is whether the government should be putting its thumb on the scale and essentially coercing a particular business model because the government believes that in doing so it is enhancing the ability of the public to learn about research that the government has funded as if there was no other way for that to be accomplished. There is nothing that prevents the funding agencies from releasing, for example, the annual progress reports that the funded researchers are required to provide to the funding agency. There is nothing preventing these agencies from having staff people who help to translate into common layman's English what the import of funded research is. And in an agency like the NIH, for example, which is perhaps the most well-funded of all science research agencies in the world, they certainly have ample resources to find other ways of informing the public about the importance of the research they've funded than by competing directly with journal publishers using a version of the journal publisher's own acquired articles.
Now, do you or any of the other panelists have any data on how a publisher would go out of business as a result of increased access? Anybody? Any data compiled on that?
You know, it's difficult, Mr. Chairman, to get data about that because, again, you know, this isn't shutting down publication by these publishers completely. What it's doing is it's making it difficult for them to recover some of the investment they make in certain articles for which part of that investment gets apportioned, because those articles happen to be the ones that are funded by the government agency and subject to this type of policy. The real question that needs to be asked, though, is there any substantial deficit in the public's ability to learn about important research that is funded by the federal government? We in the publishing community don't believe there is, and if there is a deficit, it's simply due to inaction by the government to take any number of courses that it could take to provide alternative ways for the public to learn about and understand what kind of scientific research the government is funding.
And along those same lines of questioning, and I guess we'll ask Professor Oman this one. If the NIH policy conditions its grants of funding upon the researcher's agreement to make publicly available the article in 1 year, where is the copyright issue? Can't the researcher choose another avenue and not accept the NIH funding?
It's really a difficult choice for the researcher. Obviously, professionally, a grant from the NIH is a very prestigious achievement, and if the author and the publisher have to dedicate their publication, or the manuscript anyway, to the public domain, that in their view probably would be a small price to pay. But if ultimately what happened is that this prestigious journal that they were so proud to get published in had to shut down and go out of business, maybe they would have a second thoughts about abandoning their copyright in exchange for the money.
Let me ask, to help me understand better, are the edits or additional text written by the publishers after peer review or the grantees?
I should defer to the publishing representatives, but my understanding is that in fact it's a continuing process. The publishers are involved with the author from the beginning in terms of giving them ideas, suggesting improvements to the text, consulting with other experts. They have experts on their own staff, and they do the formal peer review and then help the author incorporate those suggested improvements into the manuscript. So it's a continuing process.
So throughout the process, then they get a copyrightable attribute.
Yes, they make a copyrightable contribution to the authorship, which is protected by copyright.
Thank you. Is that how you view it, Dr. Breckler?
Yes, that's correct. And if I can clarify, the concept of grants, which is what most of the external funding at NIH and NSF and some of the other agencies is about, is designed to create an incentive and a motivation for the researchers and the scientists to take ownership of their ideas and their thoughts and the results of the research. The intellectual work that goes into publications belongs to that scientist. It does not belong to the federal government. That's the whole spirit of a grant, and it's one of the reasons why science in this country thrives, why it's so successful. These aren't necessarily contracts or works for hire. And the whole scientific research system works this way, and it spurs creativity and rapid advancements and so on. So the intellectual property really is vested in the investigator, not in the granting agency.
Have you considered a business model wherein the publisher charges the author a fee for publishing, and what would be the positives and negatives of such a model? Mr.
There are
Adler?
many publishers that do utilize that model, and some of them use it in conjunction with other models. They still continue to obtain revenue through subscribership at the cost and charges to the end user of the material. The fact of the matter is that if you were going to be basing it, your ability to recover your investments and continue to make investments on whether or not the authors who bring you manuscripts are going to be able to pay for the $4,000, which roughly goes into the processing and handling of every article that's published by a peer-reviewed journal, you're going to have to be sure that those authors come to you with the wherewithal to be able to afford that. The publishers really don't necessarily want to see authors being constrained to have to use either part of the money that they could otherwise use for research or have to go someplace else to find additional money in order to get these articles published. We believe that having the people who make use of these articles, particularly when many of those readers are, as we've suggested to you, corporate institutions that use it for their own commercial research and their own products and services, or national governments, or health-related institutions that use it in furtherance of their own missions, we don't see why those end users shouldn't ultimately have to pay for that use.
Final question. What time frame would be an acceptable embargo time period in order for publishers to recoup their investment? And anyone on the panel can take a stab at it.
As I said to you before, Mr. Chairman, we honestly believe that after discussing this, and this discussion has now gone on for a number of years since the NIH first proposed its public access policy as a voluntary policy, that there simply is no single standard that can apply across the board to all of the different business models and commercial and non-for-profit publishers in this field. Each one of them has to determine, with respect to their own investments, their own publishing schedules, their own need to utilize fees and subscription fees that come in from these to continue their publishing activities in order for them to decide what would be an appropriate embargo period. The real question to ask is that an appropriate task for the government to be determining what an embargo period should be before this material, which is under copyright, transferred by the author to the publisher, now gets to be made freely available around the world by someone else?
May I ask another question?
Yeah, let me just see this. Dr. Breckler, did you have an opinion about embargo time period?
Well, what Mr. Adler said is correct. I think ultimately, if everybody could agree to come to the table and discuss this, we could agree on some methods for determining what the appropriate embargo period would be. This is one of the reasons APA is looking at its own journals, so that we can make a determination of what a fair embargo period would be.
So each federal agency could decide that a different embargo time period.
Well, what I would suggest is that the variables that will determine that is more than just what the agency is or what the agency happens to fund, because it depends a lot also on the particular discipline of funding. NSF funds things from physics to social psychology. It depends on the format of the journal and so on.
Professor, any comment?
I just wanted to add that that perhaps a blanket approach isn't necessarily the best approach. You might want to have immediate access for patient access for people who are private citizens who are looking for an answer to a question at 3 o'clock in the morning when their child is ill, and a normal copyright protection for the rest of the world. And I think the system can be nuanced enough with digital technology to achieve that purpose without destroying the fabric of copyright.
Thank you. Thank you all for your responses. Ms. Maloney, you're recognized.
Well, thank you. I think that's an interesting statement, Professor Oman, but I don't know how you could protect the copyright, because someone could just log in through a friend and have it. But I would like to frame another question. I have strongly supported a citizen's right to government information, and in fact I'm very proud of having authored the Electronic Freedom of Information Act of 1996. It was probably the biggest access to federal archives and federal information, and required it electronically. And I've probably gotten more awards as a visionary legislator on that piece of legislation that allows the public to have access to this information. I also authored the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act, which was the largest unveiling of CIA documents probably in history. But I am concerned that in looking at the issue of public access to federally funded research, we have to be careful to protect the intellectual property, particularly since we live in such a competitive world. At one time we were competing with another state or another business. Now we're competing with China, India, Vietnam, and who knows, another emerging country that may emerge soon. And so we're competing with jobs in every way. And I think that we as a government need to protect the taxpayer dollars in this research. And a scientific publisher, likewise, whether it's a for-profit or nonprofit, or even a government publisher, has the right to protect their work product. And we need to be careful as we look at this issue. I think it's a very complicated one. And I think we need even more of an answer than Mr. Conyers has put forward, as explained to me by Mr. Adler. And I would say that some proponents of public access to federally funded research call for putting a final manuscript online immediately. Some say 6 months, some say after it's accepted for publication. But this article, in many ways, goes far beyond federally funded research. As one who just recently wrote a book, it's not that easy. You present a manuscript, your editors look at it, everybody comments in the world on it, they refine it, they take time to look at this, and so what finally is printed is not, at least in the case of my book, there were a lot of hands going into it and suggesting it could be done in a clearer way, a better way, and why didn't you add this and add that? And I would say that that's the way all publishing is, whether scientific or a book or whatever. You have publishers, you have researchers, you have fact checkers. They're not going to print anything. They have to fact check it and make sure it's accurate. They have to send it out and have all these other scientists say you're right or you're wrong or it's crazy or it's innovative or needs more research. So the point I'm making that it is a product that has been worked on. It's not, and we don't want to take that aspect out of the economic chain. If you take that out, you're not going to get the good peer-reviewed, fact-checked article. I mean, you and I can go on the internet tomorrow and publish whatever we want. Here's my scientific study on whatever, on what I think is the cure for cancer. I could go home tonight, write my paper, and print it on the internet tomorrow. No one would read it, I'm sure. But the point I'm trying to make is that anyone can publish anything now, particularly. But when it comes out of a peer-reviewed publication, it's scientific. Other scientists have spent time, and they probably pay them, I don't know, to read it and say, this is accurate, this is wrong, I think it's valuable, I think it's not valuable. So in other words, it's an expensive process that gives value added to scientific research in our country. And the point I'm trying to make is that I don't think we want to take that out of our country, because if you take that out and don't allow someone to make a profit, they're not going to do it. I just came from a financial services meeting, and one of my bills, they always want everything to be free, and I always argue that people have to make a profit or cover their expenses, or they're not going to do it. And whether it's your ATM fees, one of my bills was just letting consumers know there's an ATM fee. And then you decide whether it's worth your time to pay $1 to get your money at the spot. But the point is, publishers aren't going to do peer review, research, publish it in the first place unless they're entitled to have some type of profit or at least pay their expenses. If they can't, they have to pay people to look at these things. They have to pay fact checks. They have to, when a publisher prints something, they fact checked everything in it and paid someone to do it, maybe for months, who knows, Depends how complicated it is. So I think there are many levels that we don't want to disrupt scientific research in our country. It is probably the most valuable commodity that we have, and not only do we want it published and peer-reviewed, but in my opinion, I think we've got to be careful about protecting the intellectual property in order to be competitive in the world financial markets. If everything that we discover we're going to immediately give to every other country, then they're not going to be investing in research. They'll say, let America invest billions in research, and they'll be publishing it the next day that something's peer-reviewed and accurate, and then we can grab it and produce it quickly and undercut them, and they won't make any money off their research. If that starts happening, the private sector certainly is not going to invest in research, and you'll have members of Congress saying, why are we bothering with this research that is immediately being sent to another country? So I think that we really have a huge problem ahead of us on how we protect our copyright and protect our intellectual property for us to be able to compete and win economically. That's how serious I think it is. And then also, we need to protect the publishers, otherwise they're not going to be doing peer reviews. They're not going to be investing in fact checkers. Why should they? They won't make any profit. So, I mean, I think we have a challenge where we don't want to kill you know, what you get the point. Now, does anybody have any answers? I certainly don't, but I do know that we have a challenge in front of us, and I think it's a serious one if we want to compete and win in the world economy and hold on to our scientific research. And let me add something else. You know, you say that all of these scientists want their product to be read and they want their name on it. Well, no one's going to read their product unless it's published and fact-checked and peer-reviewed, and that takes money. You know, all of us can write a thesis tonight and throw it on the internet. Doesn't mean anyone who's going to read it. But if it comes out of the so-and-so review scientific panel of NIH or whatever, then everybody's going to look at it and say, hey, this is important. And I am very interested in women's health, and then I'll be quiet on this. And I subscribe to certain publishers on women's health because that's one of the fields that I invest my time in. And certain ones, people mail me. I mean, I wake up every morning, there's documents on my front door on women's health. But the ones I really pay attention to are the ones that are published by respected publishers and scientific communities that I know it's been fact-checked, peer-reviewed, tested on rats, tested on people, and that it's really scientifically pure, but that takes money to do it. And I don't think we want to take that out of our system. I think we're going to have a big problem on anybody doing it. And then also, I'm very concerned about our competitiveness in the world economy, and we have not done a good job in protecting. We can't even protect a song, much less a cure for cancer or other important scientific research. This is a big issue, Mr. Chairman.
It is, and I
you walked
appreciate
into a
you.
big issue. You
I
always do.
appreciate you.
He always does.
Appreciate your involvement in this hearing. The gentlewoman's time has expired, and this panel is excused. We will now ask for the second panel to come up and take your seats.
This is a huge problem.
I will now introduce our second panel. On this panel, we will hear from Dr. Richard Roberts. Dr. Roberts is the Chief Scientific Officer at New England Biolabs. Dr. Roberts was formerly educated in England. His postdoctoral research was completed at Harvard, and he is the author of numerous articles and holds several patents. Dr. Roberts is also the 1993 recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize in Physiology and Medicine for the discovery of split genes. Welcome. Next, we have Ms. Sharon Terry. Ms. Terry is the President and CEO of Genetic Alliance, a network promoting openness and centered on the health of individuals, families, and communities. Ms. Terry, a former college chaplain, and her husband founded and built an organization that enables ethical research and policies and provides support and information to members and the public. In 2009, she received the Research America Distinguished Organization Advocacy Award. Ms. Terry also has an honorary doctorate from Iona College. Welcome to the committee, Ms. Terry. Next, we have Mr. Elliot Maxwell. Mr. Maxwell is a graduate of Brown University and received his law degree from Yale. He is a former Department of Commerce official specializing in international technology policy, technology administration, as well as digital economy. He served as a senior fellow at the Aspen Institute. He currently advises on the intersection of business, technology, and public policy, and electronic commerce and telecommunications, and welcome to you. Next, we have Professor Sophia Colamarino, a graduate of Stanford and the University of California, San Francisco. After 16 years of laboratory research experience, Sophia joined Cure Autism Now in November 2004 as science director. After receiving her PhD, Professor Colamarino conducted research on genetic disorders in Milan, Italy. Sophia's extensive research has been included in many publications, in addition to her work as an Autism Speaks. She is also a consulting associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University, and welcome to you. Next, we will have hear from Dr. David Schulenberger. Dr. Schulenberger is a graduate of the University of Illinois, receiving a master's degree and a PhD. He is the author of numerous articles and publications. Dr. Schulenberger was recently the Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost at the University of Kansas. He is currently the Vice President of Academic Affairs at the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, and welcome. All right, our final witness on this panel will be Ms. Catherine Nancaro. Ms. Nancaro came to the Public Library of Science Community Journal in January 2005 to coordinate the editorial, production, web, and marketing efforts of the community journals. She is experienced as both a managing editor and development editor on peer-reviewed medical journals, and welcome to you also. It is the policy of this committee that we swear in all witnesses before they testify. Would you all please stand and raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may be seated, and let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Each of you, of course, will have 5 minutes to make an opening statement. We have your complete written testimony as part of the hearing record, and please observe the lights in front of you. Dr. Roberts, you may begin.
Thank you, Chairman Clay. My name is Sir Richard Roberts. I'm Chief Scientific Officer at New England Biolabs, a small company in Ipswich, Mass. That makes reagents for biological research. I'm also the 1993 Nobel Prize laureate in physiology or medicine. Let me thank you for inviting me to testify here on the important subject of public access to the results of publicly funded research. Because scientific research critically depends on a knowledge of the scientific literature and building on the work of others, access to this literature is the key to progress. In my view, the open access movement is one of the single most important initiatives currently underway within the scientific community. In addition to my role as Chief Scientific Officer, which involves producing the scientific vision for the future business of New England Biolabs, I'm also an active working scientist, running both an experimental laboratory and a computer-based bioinformatics lab. In my various roles, I rely completely on digital access to a broad swath of the scientific literature, so that I'm aware of all the major advances in biology as well as the latest work in my own field. I read articles in a large number of different journals and am acutely aware of the difficulties accessing articles that are not available via open access. Because of the ever-increasing cost of subscriptions, our company, like most small biotech companies, cannot afford subscriptions to all of the journals we might read. As a result, I often find myself paying the $30 or more that is often necessary to read an article that is in a journal to which I do not subscribe. Since the use of the scientific literature depends upon being able to quickly move from one article to another to find the relevant science, it is frustrating and inefficient when each step requires the time to make another payment. Even more disconcerting is when the article that one paid to read turns out to be totally irrelevant to the search in hand. Of course, the biggest problem is that without comprehensive access to the literature, it is impossible to know where the cutting edge of science lies. And it is at this cutting edge that science must work if we are to be productive. This lack of access has a very deleterious impact on the small startup biotech companies and others for whom cutting-edge science is their bread and butter. Promoting public access to publicly funded research results will have a huge impact in improving the health of small U.S. companies that depend on science, and will also send a strong message that the routine practice of denying access to those who are unable to afford the subscription costs is actually impeding science. Also, as we all know, it is these small entrepreneurial companies that create the new jobs in the U.S., jobs that are very badly needed at present. While major universities enjoy a great deal of access to the scientific literature, no institution can afford to subscribe to all of the journals that they might want to provide to their constituents. This is even more of a problem in many other sectors of societies. Many of the smaller colleges, including most of the liberal arts colleges that feed their graduates into the major research universities, have extremely limited access to the scientific literature. Ensuring public access to at least that subset of research results produced using public funds is something we can do right now and would be a useful and exemplary step towards filling this gap. Even more importantly, as was brought home to me when I attended the recent 2010 Intel Science Fair in San Jose, is that high school students, such as those preparing science fair projects, increasingly require access to the scientific literature if their projects are to include the innovation that makes them the winners. While most schools now have good access to computers, it is only when articles are available through open access that they also have access to the full range of the scientific literature. And most high schools can only dream of affording access to pricey scientific journals. We must remember that these young people going through our schools are the next generation of scientists that will enable our country to remain competitive into the foreseeable future. Providing public access to the results of publicly funded research would have an immediate and positive impact on the quality of information available to these students. Too often we forget that research is carried out in many places other than the well-known research universities. A strong policy demanding open access to the results of government-funded research can help small companies become competitive, can stimulate job opportunities within those companies, and can ensure that our students, the scientists of the future, can find out where the cutting edge of research really lies. Thank you. I welcome any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Roberts. Ms. Terry, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Clay, thank you for the opportunity to testify at this hearing. I am President and CEO of Genetic Alliance, which works to transform health through genetics. Our network includes more than 1,200 patient advocacy organizations and thousands of partnerships with universities, companies, government agencies, and policy organizations. The network is an open space for thousands of shared resources, hundreds of creative tools, and dozens of dynamic programs. I am also the mom of 2 children diagnosed with pseudoxanthoma elasticum in 1994. My husband, who is a trade school graduate, and I, a college chaplain, stole access to medical libraries, hacked into Internet Grateful Med, and ultimately read 400 articles on this disease. As a result of what we learned, we founded PXE International, created a biobank, cloned the gene, created a diagnostic test, and initiated clinical trials. We are the ordinary American public, and our access to these articles has been critical. We are not odd. There are many like us managing disease research and managing personalized care. I've heard there are hundreds of thousands of unique users of PubMed Central a day. These are not only scientists. Imagine if we have public access to all scientific articles. We applaud the Congress for the current NIH policy. Translating basic science into diagnostics and therapies is an urgent need. All information, the raw materials of making sense of disease and mitigating its effects, should be immediately available. Some say that only academicians and scientists at major institutions need access to these journal articles. Not so. We live in an information age that can and will thrust us into a new age of innovation in health and healing. This requires multidisciplinary articles in the hands of patients, parents, students, engineers, entrepreneurs, and scientists in land-grant colleges and historically black colleges. It is unconscionable that scientific information is not immediately available to everyone. While publishers argue that they create value around the raw information, we would argue that scientists funded with federal tax dollars and so stewards of the public trust infuse these articles with value. There is no doubt that the publishers add value and that the value proposition around this body of knowledge should be paid for, but not the analysis of research results themselves. It is the duty of the federal government to facilitate sunshine on this data and to bring these articles into the public commons as quickly as possible. We have seen business paradigms for all kinds of publishing industries evolve as information aggregation changes. It is time for the biomedical publishing industry to evolve as well. Today, we are among the millions facing an uphill battle, including the future of disease and disability for our children. Thousands of diseases affect millions of Americans. I have watched thousands of people in our community die in these years, and the time for waiting is over. Let's do it. Let's not spend any more of our precious time debating this, commenting on this. We live on the promise and inestimable value of publicly funded science. Obstacles to translating basic science into practice abound, but gated access is an artificial one. Remove barriers to information immediately. Grant us public access to publicly funded research without delay. We've got a great deal of work to do, and we need the tools now. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Terry, for your testimony. Mr. Maxwell, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm honored to have this opportunity to testify before the subcommittee. My name is Elliot Maxwell. I'm here representing the Committee for Economic Development, a nonprofit, nonpartisan, business-led public policy organization. For nearly 70 years, CED has provided sound policy research on major economic and social issues facing the nation. The membership of CED is made up of some 200 senior corporate executives from a wide range of industry sectors, as well as leaders from U.S. universities. To address cutting-edge technology issues, particularly those arising from the emergence of the Internet, CED established its Digital Connections Council, composed of information technology experts from CED companies. Since 2004, I've directed the DCC, which has published a series of reports focusing on the impact of the Internet and the increasing digitization of information. The members of the DCC, coming from high technology organizations, all rely incredibly on intellectual property protections as their parent organizations. But they've come to realize that the rise of the Internet and the digitization of information has led to an explosion of greater openness, and that greater openness is critical for increasing innovation. Economic development is part of the name of the Committee for Economic Development, and that's where its focus is. These are businesses that are interested in economic activity, in economic growth, and the innovation that's necessary to accomplish it. They came to the conclusion that this bill and policies that increase openness are absolutely crucial for economic growth, and to restrict access to information, to continue policies that would limit access by businesses, by individuals, by academic institutions, more broadly, would be harmful to the economic growth of the United States, would prevent the kind of growth we need at this very moment. The bill addresses three important points. One is to increase access to the research. We've heard from two people, one representing a small business, one representing individuals who are concerned about the health of their children or relatives. They don't have access. In some cases, people can't afford it. In some cases, even they're not able to get to the information or to institutions where they would have access to it. Businesses can't afford all the kinds of information that they would like to have. And it's axiomatic that the more people who have access to information, the more people who can build upon it. And the real value of information is in its use. It's not in the information itself, it's in people using it. The second important part is you want to increase the impact of the research that you fund. You want to get a higher return on the investment, an enormous investment that is made by the U.S. government. And the way to do that is to make it more available to people who are creative and who want to use this information, and we can't know beforehand how they're going to use it. And so it's very important to try to get this out as broadly as possible. And to be frank, it's not necessarily in the interest of publishers to get it out more broadly. It's in the interest of publishers to maximize their return. And that's perfectly sensible. It is in the interest of the U.S. government to get its funded research out to as many people as possible to broaden its impact. Greater openness, greater accessibility, increases the speed of discovery. It broadens discovery because it makes information available to people who might not otherwise know about it or even be working in the same field. It reduces redundant research. It keeps people from going over blind alleys they wouldn't know about because they didn't have access to it. And most importantly, it allows more people to innovate upon that research. Think about the Weather Service. I remember 3 years ago, people were saying, well, why do we have the Weather Service's information? We can get it from the Weather Channel. But the Weather Channel couldn't exist without the availability of U.S. government information. It's allowing people to have access to information, to innovate upon it, that creates those opportunities, that allows people to build businesses, to create jobs, to innovate, and that's what we need to do now. So we're speaking for businesses who want innovation, who want economic growth, and know that the way to do that, the social return on the investment of research is enhanced by making it more broadly available. It's not enhanced by restricting it. It helps people who worry about the health of their children. It helps small businesses. It helps anybody who's creative in making available this information. And because it is a U.S. government investment, we need to think about the best way of increasing that return on investment. It's consistent with intellectual property laws. The idea that journal articles exist separately from the research in some disconnected fashion seems implausible. They wouldn't exist without this research. We need to do everything we can to make the return higher, to spur innovation, and to get more economic growth. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Mr. Maxwell. Professor Calamarino, you recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Clay. I'm speaking on behalf of Autism Speaks, the nation's largest autism science and advocacy organization, and importantly, I ask that my full statement be included in the hearing record. I'm here today as a scientist with a PhD in neuroscience who serves as the Vice President of Research for Autism Speaks. We invest over $20 million in annual funding for research into the causes, prevention, and treatments for autism. I am also speaking to you today as the architect of the first public access policy for a US-based nonprofit advocacy organization. Today, I'd like to underscore the importance of open access from 3 perspectives: that of the families affected by a disorder, that of an active scientist who needs access to effectively do her job, and that of a funder that needs access to achieve our mission and provide accountability while doing so. So first, the families. My main motivation for being here today is the desire to improve the lives of individuals with autism. Autism impacts nearly 1 in 100 children in the U.S. There are currently no effective treatments that address the core symptoms, and for decades, parents and care providers have cobbled together intervention approaches as they best see fit. Access to the latest findings would empower them to be more educated advocates by allowing them to read firsthand the research progress. However, they have to struggle to find the most credible information necessary to make informed decisions because of what currently amounts to an arbitrary barrier to accessing published research literature. Sadly, in 2010, where essentially anything said by anyone can be accessible within a matter of moments, families are inundated with information and have access to all but the most scientifically rigorous data. And it's time for that to change. Second, my job as a scientist. I am tasked with providing counsel on investing millions in research funding. However, when I left academia to direct research in the context of an advocacy organization, I had no idea what a major hurdle I would find. On a Friday in 2004, I left my research position at the Salk Institute, where I had full access to scientific literature. The following Monday, I started my new position as science director of an international research organization, and I had none. To this day, Autism Speaks grantees and fellow scientists are shocked to find out that our organization does not have free access to these articles. And this is not unique to us. It is not financially possible for nonprofit funders of health research and training to subscribe to the full range of science journals needed to do their work. I also want to emphasize this barrier is not exclusive to science duties. My colleagues in our government relations divisions cannot access the primary research literature required to substantiate their policy recommendations. In sum, there's an entire segment of scientists and health advocates blocked from effectively doing their jobs without this access. Third, our mission. The mission of Autism Speaks is to improve the future for all who struggle with autism, and we are dedicated to funding global biomedical research and translating discoveries into tangible impacts. I cannot stress how important it is for research findings to be in the public domain. Funding organizations such as ours can support as much research as they wish, but unless the knowledge is utilized by others, it remains useless. Unfortunately, just as there are scientists currently denied access based on our employment situations, there are also academic researchers in less developed countries who cannot afford journal access, and even lay people who want to devote their minds to autism but cannot gain access to the literature to study it. It is critical to our mission that research papers resulting from public funding be readily available to anyone with an interest in autism research. We must also be accountable in pursuit of this mission. Our donors are typically the families of the very individuals we are aiming to help, many of whom are already financially struggling due to the heavy burden of autism care. It is exceedingly important for them to see the outcome of their investments and their impact on reducing disease burden. I find it frustratingly difficult to explain to a donor who provided me with the money in the first place to pay for the research that they have to pay once again to see the outcome of that research. Now, as I said at the start, Autism Speaks is perhaps uniquely qualified to call for expanded access to the results of publicly funded research because in 2008, we implemented our own public access policy. We modeled this policy on the highly successful policy of the NIH. Several other nonprofit organizations have since expressed interest in following ours. This is perhaps the best proof that what I have spoken of today is not about the needs of autism per se, but about the fundamental need to change the way stakeholders are finally included in this discovery process. So in summary, open access to publicly funded research will lead to more informed advocacy and further research advances. It has enormous benefits for families that need information that directly affects their lives, and it will greatly enhance the ability of scientists like me, who quite simply require access to invest our scarce research dollars. It will also help the myriad other organizations such as Autism Speaks achieve their mission, namely benefiting the public by accelerating research toward breakthrough discoveries, treatments, and eventually cures. Thank you for providing me with this opportunity to speak, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Dr. Schollenberger, you're welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Clay, for the opportunity to speak today about public access. It's an important topic for higher education for the future of the country. The Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, APLU, supports federal legislation ensuring public access to scholarly articles growing out of federally funded research. APLU is an association of public research universities, including all flagship and all land-grant universities in every state. Our 219 members enroll more than 4.7 million students, award 60% of the U.S. doctoral degrees, and conduct nearly 2/3 of all federally funded academic research. For the last 4 years, I've been the Academic Affairs Officer of APLU. Before joining the organization, I spent 13 years as provost at the University of Kansas and a total of 34 years on its faculty. I'm also an economist. My interest in access to scholarly writing was intensified both by my duties as provost and my discipline as an economist. For over 2 decades, journal prices increased at a nearly 10% annual rate, while KU's budget barely kept up with inflation. Why did journal prices increase at a rate that made them less available to higher education? That question has since been my major research focus. The problem we address is that faculty from time to time experience delays in accessing articles published in scholarly journals or cannot gain access at all. These roadblocks harm their productivity. The public access policy is primarily aimed at easing these roadblocks, but access to scholarly literature is also important to the quality of education. Clearly, superior graduate education is based on the use of this literature, but this research also informs good undergraduate instruction. Unfortunately, students at non-research institutions and their faculty don't have broad access to this research literature. Perhaps those with least access are at the community colleges, where half our country's students are now enrolled. A federal public access policy would have positive impacts on all post-secondary education. As you've heard, many businesses, especially high-tech startups, need access to research findings. Better access improves their chances of remaining competitive. The need of individuals to access the scholarly literature comes from many directions. When a child receives a deadly diagnosis, parents have difficulties understanding why they can't have ready access to the research that's been funded with their public dollars. APLU supports NIH's public access model. It works, so we support its spread to other funding agencies. The Federal Research Public Access Act follows NIH's proven model, and APLU endorses its passage with some caveats. Central deposits, such as NIH has, may not be necessary. An article conceivably could be placed in a faculty member's own university repository and be included virtually in the funding agency's public access repository. To the extent possible, we would hope deposit requirements and procedures should be uniform across funding agencies, because that would reduce the cost of compliance considerably. NIH's flexible 0 to 12-month embargo period, not, as you've heard, a one-size-fits-all, but it is a flexible period that exists now, and it depends upon the preferences of the journal of publication. We believe that's acceptable for public access. Shorter would be better, but 12 months is acceptable. A choice has to be made between deposit of the final manuscript version of the article or the article in form in which it appears in the journal. We favor the latter so long as full text, word-by-word search can be made. Some suggest that access to the final grant report would provide adequate access to research findings. We do not accept this contention. Most grant reports are narrowly focused. Journal articles generally provide context for the results reported, relate those results to the wider literature, and are more easily located through public finding aids. Public access, with characteristics I've enumerated, would be compatible with the continuation of subscription-based scholarly journals. The evidence is that public access has little impact on subscription revenue and is thus fully consistent with ensuring that the refereeing of the literature continues. Thank you.
From a Missouri Tiger to a Kansas Jayhawk, thank you to Ms. Nankaro. You recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a privilege to testify today before the subcommittee about the importance of public access to the results of federally funded research. I'm speaking on behalf of the Public Library of Science, or PLOS. PLOS is a nonprofit publisher of peer-reviewed journals. But what makes PLOS different from the bulk of journal publishers is that every article we publish is open access. Each is freely and publicly available online as soon as it is published. My name is Catherine Nancaro, and I'm the managing editor of PLOS's Community Journal program. I have over 25 years of experience in publishing, and I've managed a number of peer-reviewed medical and bioscience journals. In 2004, I was delighted to join PLOS because of its mission to drive a transition towards comprehensive public access to all research articles. Policies promoting public access have been embraced by many organizations beyond PLOS, yet concerns have been expressed that they will be detrimental to the scholarly publishing enterprise. My goal today is to make 3 key points. PLOS has shown that open access journals can be published according to the highest standards. We have shown that open access publishing is economically sustainable. And finally, the real benefit of immediate public access is that it transforms research literature into a profoundly powerful resource for research and education. To address the point about quality, PLOS has consistently adhered to the highest standards of editorial integrity and publishing ethics. We knew that we would only develop broader confidence in open access publishing if the quality of the articles that we publish is of the highest standard. 7 years from when we launched PLOS Biology, our journals are highly regarded as trusted sources of research information and are desirable venues for researchers to publish their best work. Our journals have international editorial boards comprised of leading researchers across a range of disciplines, are featured in leading blogs and media outlets, receive substantial numbers of submissions each month and continue to grow. In addition, many of our journal articles are highly cited, another indication of their significance to the research community. To address the point of financial viability, let me briefly explain our business model. Whereas most publishers charge a fee to access their content, PLOS charges a fee to publish in its journals. In this way, the cost of publishing can be recovered before publication, and the content can therefore be made freely and publicly accessible as soon as it is published. Using this model, PLOS has progressed steadily towards sustainability and posted its first 2 profitable quarters in Q1 and Q2 of 2010. In doing so, we will be on target to make a modest profit. This achievement represents a landmark for PLOS, but also for open access publishing as a whole. As well as being economically sustainable as an organization, our individual community journals are each fully self-sufficient. They represent models for how typical academic journals can maintain high standards of publishing and achieve immediate public access supported by publication fees. This is relevant to all publishers considering a move to open access, whether commercial, not-for-profit, university presses, or scientific societies. PLOS is not alone in demonstrating the economic success of open access publishing, however. 2 large commercial publishers, Biomed Central and Hindawi Publishing, have also shown that open access publishing, based on the publication fee model, is sustainable in environments where public policies have been put in place by national funders, such as the Wellcome Trust and the Research Council's UK. A prominent example is Springer, who bought Biomed Central in 2008 and continues to expand their open access publishing operation. Beyond publishers, there are demonstrable and critical commitments to open access from the other key stakeholders in publishing: funders, institutions, libraries, policymakers, and the research community. Just last week, UNESCO announced, quote, "Scientific information is both a researcher's greatest output and technological innovation's most important resource." UNESCO promotes open access. I will end by highlighting 2 examples of how researchers have made the most of public and open access to PLOS articles. Professor David Shotton from Oxford University reworked an article about a tropical disease caused by leptospira infection. He linked various terms in the article to other sources of information and data, enhanced the figures to provide movable interactive maps, and enriched tables with downloadable data. A series of editorials in PLOS Computational Biology has been translated into Chinese, repurposed into a series of video presentations, and developed into a graduate-level course curriculum. These are just first steps, but they show how public access promotes creative reuse of content and transforms the literature into a more powerful resource for research and teaching. With the elimination of all barriers to access, our use of the literature is only limited by our imagination. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nancaro, and I thank the entire panel for their testimony. And let me ask a panel-wide question, and we can start with Dr. Roberts. Are you concerned that open access would affect the peer review process?
Not at all. In fact, it's already clear that it has no effect on the peer review process. For many years, I was chief editor of Nucleic Acids Research, the first journal to go from being subscription-based to being open access. We saw absolutely no difference between the willingness of reviewers to come and review for us when we were a subscription-based journal and when we were an open access journal. I, for instance, review frequently for the PLOS journals at no charge. That, contrary to what you may have heard earlier, reviewers don't get paid. Reviewers do it for free. I have a paper in my briefcase at the moment from PLOS Genetics that I'm reviewing. It is unrelated. Peer review is unrelated to whether you're looking at subscription journals or whether they're open access journals. We do peer review as scientists because we feel this is a very important part of our service to science.
Wow, thank you for that response. Ms. Terry.
I agree completely with that. I too am a reviewer for free as well. I think that what we are looking for is an ecosystem that allows a greater enhancement of publishing overall, and you've heard some of those things here today. In addition to the immediate peer reviewers of articles that are widely disseminated are able to be integrated into technologies, into diagnostics, et cetera, and transformed more quickly. And I think the community itself, the scientists, want to do excellent work and want to hear from their peers, not just in a formal process and in a somewhat antiquated publishing system, but in a broader one that takes into account innovation and the technologies that are making the internet really successful in disseminating all these augmented and annotated resources.
Thank you. Mr. Maxwell, how does it affect, open access affects?
I think, as we've already heard, that there are peer review processes in open access journals as well as in proprietary journals. I want to make one slightly different point, and that is that the greater the public access to the material, the more likely it is that people will find problems with it or make suggestions about it. And it's not a 2 or 3 people reading a particular article. When it gets out and available, more people can see it and more people can discover things that they can build upon or things that they can criticize.
So that means the information could actually be enhanced?
Absolutely.
I see.
And sometimes I think it's an underrated part of what happens in the internet. Now, that's not to deny that there's a lot of garbage out there. We know that. But as people have said repeatedly, sunshine is the best disinfectant. It's better to have people able to have access and comment than to withhold.
Professor Calamarina, any comment?
Thank you. I think that our publishers here can speak to this a little bit better, but as far as I'm concerned, it shouldn't have an impact. And in fact, as Dr. Roberts already mentioned, and it wasn't brought up, I don't believe, on the earlier panels, reviewers are not actually paid. It is a public service work that they do, and I also want to echo what Mr. Maxwell said, which is what I was going to say, which is that science is self-correcting. And so, in fact, there's further review once the article gets out there. That review is done by the broader community, and that's how science gets used. It's very iterative, and so it actually is furthered with open access.
Thank you. Dr. Schellenberg.
I completely agree. We've had considerable experience with public access as well as open access. We don't see journals declining in numbers. In fact, the journals are a very healthy ecosystem. They're increasing in numbers very rapidly now. Thus, I'm confident that subscription-based journals will continue. That's been the experience under NIH, and I think we'll see as NIH's experience gets longer that will be the case. But as healthy as this ecosystem is, and the fact that it depends upon free labor for review and only pays to organize those reviews, I'm confident we'll develop models that will continue it into the future. We must.
Thank you. Ms. Nancaro, will open access have a negative impact on peer review?
Absolutely not. I can say that both as an editor of having been in subscription-based journals prior to coming to PLOS, but I have to say that one of the hallmarks of peer review, or the journal's responsibility, is qualitative and quantitative and a peer review of excellence. And I think PLOS has shown that all of our journals are provide, in fact, many of our authors would say it's extremely rigorous peer review. And we owe a huge debt of gratitude to the scientists who do dedicate their time to it and ensure the healthy assessment of the science that we publish.
Thank you so much. I guess I can direct this as to the panel, or maybe Dr. Schulenberger could respond. Could you give your opinion as to how you believe open access would affect students and those researchers working on projects?
In order to do the best science, in order not to repeat yourself, you have to know what's been done before. And you only know that if the material is available, is published, and you can get to it as a researcher. Much of our training of doctoral students is done as they do research. And we, having that material fully available to them makes a difference. But I want to repeat what I said earlier. We think of this as distant material. I've had a great many of my undergraduates who went to the literature and used it. Those community college students would use it. Their faculty would use it, maybe not daily, but the best of them have potentials to win Nobel Prizes someday. We just simply need to put before the material that will keep them challenged and make the most of their talents.
Anyone else on how it impacts students? Dr. Roberts.
Yeah, as I said, when I was at the Intel Science Fair, I was absolutely astonished at the level at which these students work. These are 17, 18-year-olds. A colleague of mine at New England Biolabs has a daughter she is now 18. When she was 16, she was doing science fair projects that were only possible because she had access to the internet through our company and to literature through our company. At her high school, she had no access to this. High schools can't afford access to the literature. And I think we often do a great disservice to our students by denying them access to the resources they need. We often think they're not ready for it. We're wrong. These good students, they need access to this material. And they're the future. This is the future of science. This is where we're going. We have to do everything possible to put them in touch with the information.
Thank you for that response. Let me ask Professor Calamarino. The NIH policy provides the public with access to medical research. How would expanding the policy to other areas of science help patients with information that would be relevant to their illnesses?
Well, there are many federal programs that fund research beyond just the NIH, and I think success in tackling these very complex disorders is only going to come from using a very integrative approach to examining the data. And speaking specifically about autism, which is a very complex biological and behavioral disorder, you need to have information from everything that ranges not just from the biomedical to, say, the psychological to the educational as well.
Now, some say that granting access to STM articles does not help the non-professional, such as patients and their families. How do you respond to that?
I travel this country sometimes up to 90% time meeting with these families and lecturing to them, and I have found them to be nothing but sophisticated in their ability to interpret and read these papers. And in the instances where they have questions, they print them out and they bring them to their care providers. The families are starved for information, and this would very much help provide them with what they're missing.
Yeah, Mr. Maxwell.
When you ask about the extension of this policy more broadly, it's very important to recognize that while experts are very valuable and need to be looked to, there's information, experience, expertise available far beyond those people we would designate as an expert in a particular area. And that's one of the real advantages of thinking about broad access, because we can't know in advance who's going to make this discovery, who's going to build upon it, who's going to have some entrepreneurial take on it to create a new business. We don't know that in advance. If we simply say, if you can afford it, you can get it, or if you're an expert, you can get it, that misses the real point of openness, which is to open to a broad and democratic small d group of people who can take the information and make it more valuable.
Which takes me to my next question. Ms. Terry, several witnesses have referred to access to research data. I understand that access to data is very different and that publishers agree that data should be made available. Can you explain how this is different from access to journal articles? And should we be focusing on ensuring that data resulting from government-funded research is made available?
Thanks very much for that question. I think we should be doing both. And the reason for that is the articles themselves are the distillation of the research data that has been done by intelligent people who are experts in a certain way. And I completely agree with Mr. Maxwell that then those need to be released into the ecosystem that will allow them to be enhanced more greatly. The data itself from publicly funded research as well should be shared broadly, including, I would say, anything that touches a patient. So clinical trial data, biospecimen data, et cetera. But we really need both because there right now is way more information than we could ever deal with, and we need to have the hearts and minds of all the individuals who care from every discipline looking at this data and looking at these research articles.
Let me just make an editorial comment. You know, I hear witnesses all the time. I've never had a witness come in and admit that they committed a crime. You admitted that you stole information, and I guess you were driven by a passion and a love. So I have to compliment you on you being so straightforward and forthcoming. Dr. Schulenberger, some have argued that in the current STM publishing model, the American public taxed twice, once to provide the billions of dollars for the research, and again to provide the hundreds of thousands of dollars for public institutions to buy back access to the results of that research. Can you explain what is meant by this argument?
Well, I think it is at least partially true. The public institutions are indeed funded by tax dollars, as the research is, and the cost of that research has risen to a point that we can't afford it. As you've heard, you can't make it available to our own scientists. I said partially true. The journal publishers certainly add value, but they don't add sufficient value to justify keeping the articles that are produced behind gates for the entirety of the article's life, and that's the current situation. What we're asking for is remove that tax after a year. Let the journal publishers make their return during the embargo period, and then let's make sure that the public has full access to that which they paid for.
Thank you. Ms. Carroll, are the reports generally in a usable form for the general public?
The reports meaning, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, what do you refer in terms of reports?
The research, the publisher's reports.
Oh, the published reports. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Basically, it is the published reports that they provide to the public. Are they in usable form?
Well, I think it depends on the type of submission that we receive. But generally, they are in a understandable form to an expert panel. But they are, I think, to quote Ms. Terry, there is an interpretive process that occurs after that.
Yeah, Terry, Ms. Terry.
I would also say that the output of all these journals is understandable, and certainly to a certain degree, there's opportunities then to understand further. I certainly learned a lot reading 400 articles on pseudoxanthoma elasticum, something, as my husband says, we didn't know a gene from a hubcap when we started. But all of this information has with it the ability to understand using dictionaries, encyclopedias, and other experts. So it is in a usable form, and we're using it every day, hundreds of thousands of us.
So you have to decipher and interpret and.
Sure, just like, you know, if I read my auto repair manual, I occasionally have to look up a word, but I can learn, and so can the general public.
Okay, well, thank you. And let me thank this panel for your testimony, for your indulgence with this committee, and you certainly bring a different perspective to this committee. I appreciate your service, appreciate you coming in today. This panel is dismissed. Our final panel consists of one witness, Dr. David Lipman of the National Institutes of Health. Dr. Lipman is the director of the National Center for Biotechnology Information, a division of the National Library of Medicine at the National Institutes of Health. Appointed in 1989, he has overseen the development of NCBI as a nationally and internationally recognized resource for molecular biology information. Dr. Lipman is an elected member of the National Academy of Sciences, the Institute of Medicine, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, just to name a few. Welcome, Dr. Lipman. It is the policy of the subcommittee to swear in all witnesses. I would ask you to rise and raise your right hand. Thank you. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you, and you may be seated, and let the record reflect that the witness answered in the affirmative. We will allow you 5 minutes to make an opening statement, Dr. Lipman.
Chairman Clay, it is my pleasure to testify before you today. My name is David Lipman. I'm the director of the National Center for Biotechnology Information, NCBI, at the National Library of Medicine within the National Institutes of Health, an agency of the Department of Health and Human Services. NCBI was established by Congress in 1988 as a national resource for molecular biology information. NCBI maintains more than 40 databases, including GenBank, the database of all known DNA sequences, and PubMed Central, or PMC, the archive of journal articles in the biomedical sciences. PMC is also the repository for NIH-funded articles submitted in compliance with the NIH public access policy. We launched PMC 10 years ago in collaboration with a number of publishers who deposited their journal articles in PMC to make them more widely accessible. Our experience has illustrated the benefits that a central repository could have not only for scientists, but for doctors, researchers, and the general public as well. In 2005, NIH announced a voluntary public access policy. The policy requested recipients of NIH funding to deposit a copy of their peer-reviewed manuscripts in PMC. The policy permitted delay of public availability of the article for up to 12 months after publication. However, compliance was only at 5%. To improve compliance, Congress, in the Consolidated Appropriations Act for fiscal 2008, instructed NIH to make the public access policy mandatory. This had a dramatic effect on compliance. Of the 88,000 NIH-funded articles published in 2009, 70% have been submitted to PMC, and that figure continues to grow. With increased content has come increased usage. On a typical weekday, 740,000 articles are retrieved by 420,000 different users. Last year, 99% of the articles in PMC were downloaded at least once, and 28% were retrieved more than 100 times. Annual operating costs for the public access system are approximately $3.5 to $4 million per year, which represents a small fraction of NIH's budget authority of $30 billion per year. Our costs are low because of the infrastructure and expertise that the National Library of Medicine has developed over many years. The success of the NIH model has stimulated similar efforts in other countries. Major biomedical funding organizations in the UK and Canada, for example, have public access policies similar to NIH's, and both countries use PMC software for their repositories. This collaboration expands access for U.S. users to research done worldwide. But to look at PMC as just a repository for scientific articles is to miss the bigger picture. PMC is an integral part of a larger information infrastructure that is accelerating discovery. Articles in PMC are entry points into a vast body of biomedical information maintained by NCBI and the Library of Medicine. Every day, users download over 13 trillion bytes of data, which is equivalent to all the books in the Library of Congress. Interpreting these data requires access to the underlying knowledge that is embodied in scientific articles. By having PMC journal articles integrated with our other databases, we're able to create linkages among these resources that can advance scientific discovery. For example, during the recent flu pandemic, NCBI was the major site for collecting all flu sequences. Within months, we had over 20,000 viral sequences from around the world. Through use of our system, a researcher could read an article on drug-resistant variants of the flu virus, and with a click of a mouse, compare new isolates to all other flu variants to gain new insights into flu epidemiology. As this example illustrates, PMC and the NIH public access policy ensure that the knowledge that is generated by the government's investment in research enables continued progress in biomedical science. Having a comprehensive resource that integrates knowledge and data speeds the discovery process that is critical for improving human health. Thank you for the opportunity to present our experiences to you. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Lippman. Let me ask you, why is it important for there to be government-run databases of federally funded research articles? For example, what do you think about requiring the government to link to the original journal's website in order to read the articles?
Well, our experience, I think we found several important advantages of having the actual content available at the National Library of Medicine. For one thing, the Library of Medicine has been archiving the literature for 150 years. The historical record is that archiving is done by libraries, not by publishers. So this is very precious information, and we really need to have long-term archiving. Two, when the content is not being used directly on your site, when there are problems with the underlying data, problems in terms of being able to connect to other kinds of information, you just can't find that out. The reason why so many websites really find it valuable to mine the way people use their website is they can improve it by seeing how it's being used. We've been doing this for several years. We call it our Discovery Initiative, and we can provide quantitative information on how users improve their use of the resource by us being able to follow what they're doing and actually train the system instead of trying to train the users. So that's just a few of the reasons why we find it really critical that the archive be available. In addition, our outside advisors, we did try a link out option for a period of time in the beginning of PubMed Central, probably about 10 years ago actually at the start, and that we had a number of problems with doing that, and they ultimately advised us to stop that option because of the problems that we faced.
Out of curiosity, have you been able to digitize and make that 150 years worth of research and knowledge accessible to the public?
That's a very exciting prospect, but we have begun some of that, and I'll say one thing. Right. Our initial advisors in PubMed Central said, you know, the information in the older articles is very valuable. What about the participating publishers, the publishers, and there's quite a few, hundreds of them, hundreds of journals actually voluntarily, even before the the public access policy, were collaborating with us in doing this, and we worked with them and the British government. Actually, I'm sorry, the Wellcome Trust and the British government provided funds for us to digitize articles going back to the 1800s. This included articles from the American Society of Microbiology, where there was tremendously interesting data on the Spanish flu from 1918 and other diseases where, while they didn't have the molecular biology methods, they did have doctors' observations and epidemiological data that has proved valuable. So that's a great point, and to the extent that we've been able to do this, we found it's been tremendously beneficial.
Wonderful, wonderful. Doctor, I understand that it has only been a few years, but how has the NIH policy affected research, and how do you believe it has affected publishing?
Well, I don't know how to say this the right way, but 10 years ago when we were starting PubMed Central, we heard a lot of the same concerns that the publishers raised. 10 years has gone by, and a lot of those things didn't happen. Right, and so we heard those same things again 5 years ago when there was the start of the public access policy, and now it's been in full force for the last, in a mandatory form, for 2 years, and at least we're not aware of dramatic changes because of that. On the other hand, as we've said, we have a heck of a lot more articles that are now being intensively used by people around the United States. So we're seeing a lot of benefits already, at least in terms of usage. It takes a while before that translates into differences in healthcare and so forth, but usage has to come first.
So I would assume the scientific community is no different than the rest of American society. We tend to resist change initially, and then after the initial shock and they get over it, then they embrace the change, I assume. Have you seen a widespread use and increasing use of your site?
Yes, actually, there's been about a doubling, I think, for many aspects of usage just since 2008. So yes, we do see an increased use. And actually, I'd make an important point that as more data, as more articles are in PubMed Central, we see a concomitant increase in usage. It's sort of proportional. And we find that for all of our databases. The more comprehensive they are, the more the usage is, and they just track right along with each other.
Okay. If the platform used to support PubMed Central is portable, can other agencies use this to establish their own repositories?
Thank you for that question. Absolutely, we would be pleased to help any agency in that manner. Frankly, the expertise that the Library of Medicine has had over 10 years of doing this, I think could be used in many ways to help the other agencies, from simply consulting and advice to using software like PubMed Central, to even having the Library of Medicine do the first phase of the creation of the government-wide archive. In other words, the sort of librarian aspect of getting the content from publishers or from authors, making sure it's in a stable, uniform digital format, and then providing at least simple forms of retrieval across it all. We could do that, and I think we could do it very cost-effectively. We could project those costs. But then for domain-specific usage, things that are very important for some areas of physics or meteorology or other areas outside of our expertise, those articles could be pulled into an agency-specific, domain-specific archive. So I think that there's a whole range of ways that the experience of the Library of Medicine could be used to make this succeed.
Thank you for that response. And last question, can you describe the process by which researchers submit their work to NIH? Is it a difficult process to comply with?
Right now, there are 900 journals that have arrangements with the Library of Medicine so that the content comes in automatically. They have it in one digital form, we convert it into our format, and the author doesn't really need to do anything. And that is about 40% of the articles. For the 60% remaining, the author does have to upload the manuscript to our site, but that process takes about 10 minutes. So I would say 10 minutes in the course of 6 months of research, I think that that's reasonably easy.
Pretty reasonable. Hey, let me thank you and thank all of the witnesses on all three panels who indulged us today, who gave up their time to come. I will say that public access to federally funded research was a different topic for me, but I certainly learned a little today. And with that, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you.